It's 1:30 by my clock, so we'll.
Yeah, you're okay.
All right, we'll start the meeting. I'm not sure. Kellen, you're going to do the roll call?
Okay.
All right. See if we have a quorum.
Roll call for Wyoming Water Development Commission. Nick Bettis. Gerald Guy. Clinton Glick. Kellen Lancaster here. Sheridan Little.
Welcome to the select committee. Those who could make it, we're welcome to have you. And congratulations, I believe, on both of your elections, if I read the newspaper correctly. So
Well, we're gonna have a roll call and call both of them.
we'll do audience introductions, maybe starting with you, Representative, and
All right. Terry Paxton, House District 47, most of Central Wyoming.
John Eklund, House District 10, which is mostly eastern Laramie County and a part of Goshen County.
Kellen Lancaster, Water Commission. I'm from Star Valley, District 4.
Rod
David Evans, District 1, Southeast Wyoming, and I'm from Cheyenne.
That's Stephen. I live in
General's office.
Katie Talbot, Water Development Office.
Body Director, Water Development Office.
We'll start with you.
State Engineer's Office.
Greg Kerr, University.
Katie will wave her arms and otherwise make sure if we can't be heard or we're doing something wrong audio-wise, etc. Harry, we have down here financial status report, Q.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
under tab Q, the smaller notebook. Just kind of a refresher, these financial projections were provided to you back in August. First one, of course, is Water Development Account 1. As you see, the projected balance available for appropriation, $46 million plus. That are basically available for this round of meetings. I will point out that this time, a round of applications, you have about $16 million in project requests coming at you for Water Development Account 1, so that balance is healthy and adequate in moving forward. You go to Account 2, a little different picture, about $9 million plus available, but you have almost $23 million in requests. And that, of course, has spawned some of my recommendations for no funding, and it's really based primarily on the reason that there is inadequate funding in that account. I have a recommendation we'll talk about this afternoon and Friday in terms of potentially moving some funds from Account 1 to Account 2 that would help that, scenario. And then Account 3, $56,700,000 plus available in the account. And the request this year for out of account 3 total $3.3 million. So more than adequate funding in account 3 in terms of moving those projects forward. So, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for questions with regards to the financial projections available in those accounts.
Questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Representative Eklund.
so Harry, a while back, we talked about some money that was borrowed out of one of our accounts, and it was, I'm thinking maybe 6 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. Has there been any discussion, do you think we're ever going to pay that money back, or is it still fresh in the minds of our JAC that it was borrowed and was back?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Eklund, there's been what I would consider a number of appropriations out of water development accounts. The one, I think, so those borrowing efforts that happened in the 1990s and into the 2000s, I believe have been repaid. Okay. But the most recent one was a $10 million diversion out of account 3 that was used to help balance a general fund in fiscal year 16. That was characterized by Governor Meade as a loan from the program, but there's been really no further discussion on repayment of that. And I think potentially the financial situation for the state finances has to improve maybe even further than it has currently before there's a repayment option. And then the items last 2 budgets that I guess are of a concern was when a portion of the state engineers operation was taken from general fund funding to water development account 1 funding. And that total through the end of this biennium will total about $20 million from account 1 that's been diverted out. And that it was not characterized as a loan in any of the conversations I had. It was just a flat diversion. We're going to fund a portion of the state engineer's office out of Water 1. That was previously done in the 1990s for a short period of time, 6-7 years. But once financing or revenue improved for the state of Wyoming, then it was put back, state engineer's office was put back into the general fund, as has been really the history of that agency. And that history goes back to 1890 when that office was created. But it has really over the years been primarily funded with general fund revenues, except now half of it is coming out of Water 1. So those are the kind of the obvious ones. I think there's some smaller pieces there, but so in round numbers, there's $30 million in the last about 4 years.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Harry, are we, part of our recommendation, going to be asked select water and then the legislature to consider any repayment? Is that going to be one of our recommendations this year or no?
Mr. Chairman, I am not making that recommendation. I think it's important that we not lose sight that in fact these diversions, at least some of them were characterized as loans. But I think if you talk about the state engineer's office operation, my hope would be that in future budgets, we move it back to the general fund. It would be a huge step because right now it's about a $6.5 million per year diversion coming out of Water 1. And even though Water Development Account 1 is in fairly good financial shape today, that's largely due that we did not have a lot of project requests out of 1 this year. And last year was a little bit lean as well. But I know there's a number of communities that are talking about pretty expensive water projects in the future. And I know those funds are going to be needed going into the future, so.
Just a quick follow. So are we thinking of maybe asking them to consider that change for the state engineer's office, or we're not going to really bring that up at all, I guess?
Well, so, Mr. Chairman, we're currently in the first year of this biennium, so it is intact in the biennium budget. So it would have taken a supplemental request to maybe change that in the second year of this biennium. I think the more appropriate time
Next year?
would be when we start to formulate the next biennium budget, to have a conversation with the governor as the governor develops his budget going forward.
Well, on the back ones, it would be the water development, the select water committee, the legislature that brings the bill to bring it back. We can't do that, but they can.
We could recommend though, correct? Yeah.
And certainly, in terms of the legislature's operations, the Joint Appropriations Committee could initiate that. And it could be at the urging of a select water committee or a joint ag committee or just members of appropriations. But I think recognizing that there have been funds that have been borrowed, and a repayment is still an expectation of the Water Development Commission, I think keeping that message alive through legislators, I think, is important.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, and I think that it's important that probably the Ag Committee, but Select Water especially, as well as the Commission, make sure as we're going into a new administration that he's aware, our new executive officers are aware that that loan was made, and that method of funding the state engineer's office is not what the state of Wyoming has been doing, and it's detrimental to the water program and to most of Wyoming, because about everybody benefits from this water programs, the water programs we have. So anyway, I just bring it up so that we make sure we don't lose sight of it, and the new administration needs to be aware of how, and I'm guessing he might know, I don't know about the loan, but I think he would know that the state engineer is something new. Was the choice to move the state engineer's money to water development JAC, or was it the governor's recommendation?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Eklund, I believe that was a joint appropriations effort.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner
Harry? Thank you. Harry, is there any way to get money in account 2 other than, can we move some of money out of account 1 to 2? What's the protocol?
So, Mr. Chairman, those 3 accounts are defined in statute, excuse me, and the funding that flows into those accounts is also defined in statute in terms of the distribution of severance taxes that flow into those accounts. The commission does not have a say in that process, and we have treated those accounts very religiously that those are standalone accounts for specific purposes. The legislature, however, can certainly change those. They can make one-time diversions like the 10 million out of account 1. We have used in the past Buffalo Bill account dollars that flowed into account 2 a number of years ago. That all takes legislative authorization. So I think to the extent you want to consider that, a recommendation coming from the commission is appropriate, but ultimately it is the legislature that makes those decisions and the governor that would approve those bills. And I would certainly, and I'm going to be, as I indicated, recommending a transfer from what is a Buffalo bill to account 1. You have approved that action. That still requires legislative action. But I'm going to suggest to you today and Friday that we might want to consider, instead of those funds flowing into account 1, that we move them to account 2. That's a recommendation, if you agree, that would then flow from commission to select water and ultimately the legislature. Thank you.
We will talk more about that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions of Harry? Thank you, Harry. And I think what's next fills out the afternoon is a preliminary review of the funding applications, which is in the black folder. So do you want to start on that, Harry?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The first project that I'll bring to your attention is under tab A, and that is the Buffalo Wells and Transmission 2019 project. And Keith, you have a memo if you'd like to distribute that to the commission. So we are wrapping up, and you'll hear tomorrow the final closeout memo presented by Keith on the level 2 feasibility study that was done for Buffalo, looking at supplemental groundwater supplies for that community. Currently, and if members that were on the commission here, 4 or 5 years ago, we went up and toured Tyhack Reservoir. That is the primary water supply for the city of Buffalo. It's surface water supplies. The water's released out of Tyhack into Clear Creek, and then the community picks that water back up out of Clear Creek and runs it through their surface water treatment plant. Buffalo is concerned, as most surface water providers are, that a tanker truck hauling hydrocarbons overturning into Clear Creek would contaminate that water supply. Potentially large forest fires in that drainage impact that water quality. And so that's what kind of spawned their look at, can we also bring online groundwater supplies? That's what the level 2 study has looked at, and the level 2 study has concluded that probably the best groundwater supply would be development of shallow wells in the Clear Creek alluvium on the same property that their surface water treatment plant is located. And so that's the recommendation out of the level 2 project. That now shows up as this first level 3 project, Buffalo Wells and Transmission 2019. They are proposing to drill just that 10 shallow wells in the Clear Creek alluvium. The reason I'm bringing this to your attention today and again tomorrow is that a number of the adjacent landowners who are using groundwater have now expressed a concern of what will these new wells do to impact our water supply. And that's the feasibility study looked at that. The memo that Keith just handed out addresses some of their concerns. Primarily, those wells are drilled or completed into a deeper aquifer, not the alluvium. And the name of that aquifer, Keith, was the Wasatch Formation. So is there hydrologic connection between the alluvium and that Wasatch? Potentially, somewhat. But if Buffalo were to divert out of these wells, they would have a current day priority. And in order for the Wasatch to be really affected by these wells, you would have to dewater this alluvium and along with that Clear Creek. That's not going to happen because these will be junior water rights. So while I don't want to downplay their concerns, I think their concerns are legitimate and need to be heard. Those are concerns that I think have been addressed in the level 2 study, and so I'm certainly recommending that this project be funded and go forward. A number of those landowners, and you have within, well, it would be, excuse me, it's under your tab T in the not the project notebook, the meeting notebook. The adjacent landowners have written a fairly lengthy letter with a number of questions about this project. And so they have asked to be heard before the commission, and I believe they will be here tomorrow when you hear the closeout memo on the level 2 study, then they would like an opportunity to address the commission. And so that will happen tomorrow. You have a copy of their letter, and the memo that Keith handed out at least works to address some of their questions. I think the role of the commission here, however, is funding of this project, not necessarily discussing the merits. I think Buffalo has decided that it is in their best interest to develop a supplemental groundwater supply, and certainly issues of interference. We have Wyoming statutes that deal with interference. Those are directed to the state engineer's office. So I believe their issues can be answered or can be resolved, or there's no impact of this project on their wells. But nevertheless, they are concerned, and I think I'm recommending that they be able to address you tomorrow as part of that project closeout. So that's my comment on the Buffalo project. So question?
Maybe a little time tomorrow that these landowners want to comment, and we'll give them that time. Are there any questions on this project? Let me just mention, Harry, so that this was the project recommended by the master plan for Buffalo?
Mr. Chairman, it was kind of spawned in the master plan in terms of looking at groundwater as a source, but it was a level 2 study now wrapping up that looked at the feasibility, and they looked at several other groundwater sources, looking at deeper formations south of the community, and Keith is our project manager on that. But ultimately, the cost of bringing water further from the south and drilling those deep wells was viewed as not as feasible as these 10 shallow wells in terms of accomplishing an emergency supplemental supply for the town of Buffalo.
And then secondly, so this is an issue of supply and redundancy?
Mr. Chairman, yes.
Mr. Chairman, so I'm not sure I understand that. So these wells would be recharged by what Buffalo is using out of Tyhack that goes into Clear Creek anyway, and it would be just a higher quality water in case of a fire or whatever.
So, Mr. Chairman, in getting into the water rights part of it, in the most basic form, Buffalo is proposing to drill 10 new wells in the Clear Creek alluvium. Those would be new water rights, current day priorities, and separate from their Tyhack supply. But both of those supplies are coming from Clear Creek in essence, but they would be new water rights. And so what they offer to Buffalo is, in the event of, like I said, the tanker truck overturning into Clear Creek, and as that pollution plume or gasoline or diesel fuel, as the case may be, moves down Clear Creek, that's a fairly short duration event. It moves out of the system. So Buffalo needs the opportunity in that case to be able to pump from, if they pump from the alluvium, it's not directly out of Clear Creek. It gives them some time that they're able to avoid the diesel plume, I'll say, moving downstream. So it's a short-term solution. These wells will be piped directly into their surface water plant because they're shallow wells, they will be considered under the influence of surface water. So they will have to be treated as surface water, but it gives them that short-time emergency response. Now, in the other event of a forest fire, which is maybe putting additional organic carbon or dissolved carbon into the water of Clear Creek that ends up in the reservoir, then these wells also offer a filtering possibility because the water moves through the alluvium to the wells, that they could use them in that case. That's the basic assumption. But they could also look at water exchanges if they wanted to improve the priority of these wells, where they would release Clear Creek water, or excuse me, Tyhack water to Clear Creek, and then take that water out through these wells. and I've talked to the state engineer about that. So that gets into the intricacies of which water you're actually using. But I think in its most basic form, consider these new water rights on Clear Creek with current day priorities. So anything senior to that, and the state engineer has said they would be regulated as if they were a surface water supply. So anyone who's impacted on the surface water side can put a call, and these would be the first wells turned off, or the first water supply turned off, because they are so junior in the system. But they're really being viewed as this emergency supplemental supply under any number of scenarios.
Thank you, Harry. We'll hear more tomorrow, I guess. And Cody Canal, Commissioner Seacon.
I could have heard incorrect. Did you say they had they sent a letter? Or are we going to get that tomorrow, or are we going to see that tomorrow?
Mr. Chairman, you have that in your notebook. If you go to tab T.
The meeting notebook.
Meeting notebook.
Oh, okay,
notebook.
sorry.
Sorry for the confusion.
Okay.
So the first project closeout memo under T is the Buffalo Groundwater Supply Project. And then right behind that, you will see a March 4th letter from this group. And there's also an October 22nd letter delivered to the mayor and city council. So they lay out their concerns. And again, I think they're appropriate concerns to be expressed and should be addressed, I think, primarily by the city of Buffalo. Okay.
Any other questions, Harry, on the Buffalo well?
Mr. Chairman, if I didn't tell you, these 10 wells are proposed to be drilled on land owned by the city of Buffalo, which is where their water treatment plant is currently situated. So, okay.
Next is Cody Canal laterals.
Well, so Mr. Chairman, I'm just gonna go hit projects where I think there's some concern, or maybe my recommendation does match what the request was. So I'm not going to hit every project. So the next one I would direct you to is the Aetna storage project under tab C. Tab C. So in the project notebook, tab C, I'm recommending on this project funding in the amount of $710,000 and some change for a new 250,000 gallon tank for Aetna. They currently have a 250,000 gallon tank, and they're wanting to supplement that. Their request, however, was for a 500,000 gallon tank, and they had done their own level 2 study, which they provided a copy to us, and we've reviewed. So when we looked at this originally, the existing population of Aetna, 143 people in round numbers, 145. My first take was that seems like a lot of storage for that very small community. But in talking with them, they have, and this is on that first page, the write-up, they have an existing development with 140 new taps. That is an existing subdivision. It's largely undeveloped. I think there's 6 properties developed. Aetna has committed to them that once they get additional storage online, that they would be able to connect those 140 taps into their system. There's another development being proposed with 67 taps. So there's a huge amount of growth that is at least planned in and around Aetna, and Aetna's trying to get ready for that. They believe their water supply is adequate, but they need no storage. So in looking at the level 2 study, the first thing that jumps out is of the current 143 population, if you look at their average daily demand and convert that into a per capita gallonage, it works out to be about 765 gallons per capita day. And that's probably about 7 times more than most communities in Wyoming, which we think about 100 gallons per capita day is an average daily use. But they have plentiful water supplies. So They're providing water to their citizens. In their analysis, they also, in calculating how much storage does this community need, they also derated the storage of their existing tank and a proposed new tank to 80%. So even though we're going to build a 250,000 gallon tank, they're saying we're only going to rely on 80% of the volume. And what that does is it means you need a bigger tank. And so what my recommendation is at this time, and I have spoken to the mayor about this, and I expect the mayor to be here tomorrow to address to you. But in talking with him, I said, one, your per capita usage is high. He understands that. We can't just build lots of tank volume because we should be, the commission has to be concerned about our funds and using it wisely. So I'm going to recommend the 250,000 gallon tank. And if the community continues to grow, then we can look at additional tankage in the future if it's warranted. But at this time, I can't justify anything more than that. I also am recommending that he look at a conservation program because you bring your per capita use down, you don't need the same tank volume. And so there's some efficiencies involved there, and he understands that. But nevertheless, I think his request to you will be to fund their full request for a 500,000 gallon tank. And I did bring up the issue that has he sought funding assistance from the developers of these adjacent subdivisions that want to connect in there, because we do have a restriction that we're not going to provide windfall benefits to developments is part of our funding program. So I think the mayor understands that, but nevertheless, he will address you tomorrow in terms of their request.
Harry, did they say, is everything metered?
Mr. Chairman, I believe it is metered. They have a water rate structure that I think the monthly bill for 5,000 gallons was $32. But in looking at this, I need to double check this, but I believe their tiered rate structure shows for more water you use, you're paying 50 cents per 1,000 gallons, which is a very cheap rate across Wyoming. You get into other communities, it's more anywhere from $2 to $5 per 1,000 gallons. So that in itself is not a conservation-driven type funding schedule. But again, they have adequate water supplies. And so they're providing water to their community folks, or to the members of the community. But certainly it's higher usage than we see across other places. And I will tell you, in Star Valley, I've run across this in other locales over the years that, again, good, adequate water supply. So people like to water gardens and lawns, and so you see a very green, lush valley in the summertime. I'll defer to Kellen. But part of it's due to very plentiful water supplies.
And I ask, I think they've been notorious for not burying their water lines deep enough, so they let it run during the winter. And that's why I asked about the metering. And also, I think that has a direct effect on their sewage systems and septic systems.
Any other questions for
I have one,
Commissioner Lincoln?
just so I have this in my mind when they come tomorrow. Is it twice as much money, Harry, for twice as much tank? That's if they went to $500,000.
Mr. Chairman, there. We have that number.
Sure, on the back of that.
And 200 versus the requested funding of 1 million.
Yeah, so it's about a third, well, it'll be about a 50% increase for 100% additional volume. Okay.
That end of the valley's growing at about 2% a year. It's the bedroom community for Jackson Hole. Sounds like they've done their research. We'll learn more tomorrow.
And my conversation with the mayor, he did say that they are expecting significant overflow from the Jackson area. Excuse me. And this first subdivision, 140 taps, is platted and in place. So, but they have not allowed them to connect to their system until they get additional storage on the system. So if you look at, we don't have a population, but it'll more than triple the, if these lots were ultimately developed and connected in, it'll more than triple the population of Etna, or at least for this water and sewer district.
Any other questions of Harry on this? I won't get on a soapbox, but I will mention being involved heavily in some conservation measures in Cheyenne for the Board of Public Utilities in 2002, 2003. They really are, and I think that's the title of the plan in Cheyenne, is wise water use or common sense water use, not really conservation. Because if you can water whenever you want, as much as you want at a very inexpensive cost, doesn't mean you should by common sense. And if you come out in Etna or any place else with common sense measures, I find the population is ready to do it. I think people are ready to conserve gas and electricity and water if you talk about it with them. So I would urge using a title instead of conservation or restrictions, common sense use and wise water use. And I think that's really what we're talking about. Next, Harry.
Mr. Chairman, the next project I'll direct you to is under tab G. Weather modification in the Medicine Bow Mountains, 2019-2020. So let me step back and tell you that, excuse me, next week, November 15th, we will be initiating an airborne seeding program in the Medbows and Sierra Madres. We would like to continue that into subsequent years, and as such, we'll need a budget appropriation to do that. The budget we've established is $589,000. And if you go to page 2 of that recommendation, you can see that the Medbows and Sierra Madres, that cost for housing the aircraft, it'll be based in Cheyenne. And obviously there's downtime when there aren't storms to seed, but when there are seedable clouds, they take off and we'll fly the Medbow and Sierra Madres. This year, we bid a component to include the Laramie range, because if you think about it, with airborne aircraft, you're much more flexible in being able to move to a particular storm. So if that storm's rolling across the Medbows, we can fly out to seed it. Or if that storm front is really focused on the Laramie range, you can fly out of Cheyenne and seed that as well. We had to drop the Laramie range this year because the costs were too high in terms of what we had for available funds. That program also has an add-on component. In fact, I signed the agreement this morning with I can't recall the exact entity in Colorado, that basically will allow our program. We fly the Medbows and Sierra Madres, and if we have seeded those clouds and we have time, we will fly into Colorado and seed the Never Summer range there, which is basically drainage area for the North Platte. And any cost associated with flying across the state line, airtime and seeding agent, will be paid for by this Colorado entity. And so again, the program is very flexible in that regards because we're operating aircraft and not ground-based generators. So we've also received this year from the Cheyenne Board of Public Utilities a $45,000 cash contribution to that program, because they see the value, the majority, I shouldn't say the majority, but certainly a large portion of their water supply is derived from the Medicine Bow Mountains, the North Platte drainage. And so they are contributing cash. That is the only contribution we have in this program. So For next year, we're proposing the Med-Bow program, the Laramie Range add-on, and then you see a Board of Public Utility contribution, a small office oversight budget of $5,000. So that gives you the total budget of $589,000. So I guess I would stand for any questions about that. I just wanted to make you aware that we're moving that program forward.
Questions for Harry? No questions, Harry. Next project.
Next project is our weather modification program in the Wind River Mountains. You can see that the proposed budget is $235,000. And if you go to page, where'd it go? Page 3.
H.
Tab H, yes, thank you. So we're estimating, again, 10 ground-based generators. The 10 same generators we've been using for well over 10 years now. $459,000 for the operations budget. We have entered into an agreement with the downstream states and upstream states, for that matter, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and then Arizona, Arizona, Nevada, and California, for cost sharing of 50% of actual costs. So you see their contribution, and this is planned in the budget, $229,500. The cost share that we're proposing for water development is $229,500. We add $5,000 for program administration. And so then total requested amount, $234,500. We've rounded that to $235,000. So just so you have all the information that you need, last year we made a similar proposal, and members of Select Water brought an alternate proposal, which was not a 50% cost share with the lower basin, but a 20% cost share. And so if you look page 1, the last paragraph there, we've provided some language that kind of follows the scenario that was used last year to say, in the upper Colorado River Basin Compact, Wyoming is allocated 14% of the total water supply available to the upper basin. And that was used as a basis to say, well, Wyoming should only cost share for 14%. But that's 14% of total water supply between 4 states. And then if you look at the total weather mod cost, and this is for all of the costs in Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming for the drainage basins that serve the Colorado River Basin, those costs are estimated $1,945,185. So if you look at Wyoming's current contribution this year of $80,000, and so coming out of last year's bill, that represents 4.11% of total weather mod costs in the basin. If we're going to compare that to 14% of water supply, you can see that Wyoming is not paying a commensurate share as the 14%. It's 4.11. If you do that same calculation, we used $240,000, which Wyoming share. Actually, it should be $235,000 because I took $5,000 out of that budget. But the $240,000 share calculates to be 12.34%. Again, compare that to 14% of the water supply. If you run that number on the $235,000 number, it's actually 12.08%. So I believe that this proposal is fair. It matches what's happening in Colorado and Utah in terms of the lower basin matching 50% of the state shares, and is commensurate again with the water supply that's allocated to Wyoming out of the upper Colorado River Compact. So again, my recommendation is 50% cost share. This year our share is 20%. It's been 25% in the past. So that will be, if you agree with that, we can move that forward to Select Water, and then that same debate, I'm sure, will ensue with regards to, is this an appropriate cost share for Wyoming in this program? So questions on the Wind River program.
Any questions for Harry? Okay, need a calculator on that, so. All right, hearing nothing, we'll move on to the next question, or next project.
Mr. Chairman, I would go to tabs J, start with J, but J and K are really the same issue. These are Gillette Regional Extension projects. Excuse me. So last year, this is tab J, so the 2018 project, you recommended appropriation of $1,809,000 for design and construction of regional extensions that would bring in 3 districts, connecting them to the Gillette pipeline, excuse me, the Gillette Madison pipeline. And that would have brought in the 3 districts, the Buckskin District, Fox Ridge District, and Rosette Ranchettes. The last 2 represent 263 people of sorts. So during the legislative session, Senator Driscoll brought an amendment to that bill, which I think you're well aware of, and we are reciting that amendment at the bottom of page 1. And as a condition of this funding, Gillette had to agree to provide domestic, livestock, and miscellaneous water use for applicants in Crook County applying for taps, and the number of taps to be allowed, 200 taps. And of course, I think you know the history. We provided then a project agreement to Gillette with that stipulation, and they rejected that. Said that is unacceptable to them. So what has happened is those 3 districts that very much want to connect into the Gillette Madison pipeline were not afforded that opportunity. The project has not moved forward. So last summer, the Buckskin Improvement and Service District lost their water supply well. It failed. I'm not sure whether it was the well or the pump. And so Gillette went ahead with Campbell County Gillette Special or Specific Purpose Tax funds and connected them into their system. So that portion of the project has been resolved. That's why you see a cost reduction of $296,000 for this project. In this section, you have 2 letters from Gillette, which basically are asking the commission to appropriate these funds again, and in essence, remove the amendment that was placed on it by the legislature, because that's unacceptable to Gillette. And so this amendment, or this recommendation, basically is bringing to you the cost reduction, but also recommending, my recommendation to you is that we seek an amendment to last year's construction bill to remove this amendment that's unacceptable to Gillette. It's an amendment that is not related to the extension project. It's related to the full Gillette Madison project, but it was attached to this project. And in essence, there are 263 people in round numbers in Campbell County that would very much like to connect into the Gillette Madison project, but they don't have the funding to do that. And so my recommendation is we seek an amendment to take that specific amendment out. Under tab K, you see the same recommendation, but for the 2017 extension. And that particular project, that extension would serve approximately 1,500 people. And those 1,500 people currently, that project cannot move forward because they don't have adequate funding. So again, my recommendation is that we seek an amendment in last year's construction bill to pull out the 200 taps for Crook County amendment. And I guess my way of thinking is you've heard the issues that are going on up and around the new wells. I believe that ultimately DEQ is going to find that the Gillette wells did not cause the acidic aquifer for those shallow aquifers, and there's adequate seals on the 5 new wells. But so there, and you've heard from that group of people, you know, a couple dozen people potentially that have had impacts, they believe. But between these two projects, there's over 2,000 people in Campbell County that can't get access to the Gillette-Madison pipeline because of those amendments. And so hence and at Gillette's request, we'd like to remove, or I'm recommending that we try to remove those amendments. And ultimately, if you agree to that, the amendments will be put into the construction bill, and it will go back to the legislature that ultimately put those amendments in place. Questions on those two?
Before I look for, go ahead. Commissioner
Otherwise,
Hanson.
we're just passing the buck down to them guys.
Before I ask, I've had a comment. Doesn't this, I know that on the agenda sometime tomorrow, I guess, there's an application from Crook County for getting some taps going in that same area of Crook County that's impacted by the controversy we've dealt with. Could you talk about that now? Because I think they dovetail.
Yes.
So can you explain that too?
So if you go to tab, let's see, tab P, as in Peter, Crook County Rural Water Supply Plan, as we're calling it, budget of $250,000. So it was actually during the August meeting that we had in Gillette, where we were talking about the Gillette-Madison pipeline issues. There was a county commissioner there from Crook County. And so during the break, I talked to that commissioner and I said, currently, after our tour, there were a number of landowners that expressed an interest in connecting to the Gillette system. Some of them had that 8-inch or their part of its 12-inch piping adjacent to their property. So if they applied for a tap from Gillette, Gillette said we'd need to put a water service agreement in place. Or stock water was to be limited to 3 years, as I recall, but rural domestic water could go on beyond that. I said that pipeline doesn't cover all of the landowners that we've heard from. And I asked that commissioner, would Crook County be willing to sponsor an application for a level 3 project to construct an additional mile of pipeline down that highway that we drove down? And if you recall where we turned around in front of the church is one of the impacted properties. It would run down to that church and we'd be able to pick up, I think, 8 or 10 or a dozen more taps in that effort. But certainly I didn't think it was Gillette's obligation to do that. But these are residents of Crook County. And so hence my question to the commissioner from Crook County. So she took that back to the full commission and ultimately they called me during a commission meeting to discuss that. We developed a cost for that. It was about $1 million project, of which we would fund 67% potentially with your endorsement. And Crook County then would need to come up with the other third. So Crook County, they're not in the water supply business currently, was a little hesitant about that. And so ultimately, and Senator Driscoll was also part of that commission meeting, it was suggested by Senator Driscoll that before we start building pipelines, we ought to look at a bigger picture in and around Carlisle to determine who actually has poor quality groundwater that they're currently utilizing. Would they be interested in a community water system? What would that community water system cost? And is there an interest in forming a district that could either develop its own water supply or potentially use Gillette as its water supply component? And so that's where this request was born out of. We did get a request from Crook County for that, to that effect. It doesn't fit within your application because this is a planning study, level 1. Those applications are due March 1. I gave them that deadline and they said this issue is important enough that we really don't want to wait until March 1 and wait through another legislative cycle. So we're bringing this application to you as I think a legitimate commission effort to look at the water supply issues in and around the Carlisle area. So this particular budget, we've put some dollars in there for additional water well or water quality testing for wells. We're putting some costs in there for hydrogeology review in the area. And so I'm bringing that forward as a recommendation to move that forward as a planning project for you. You'd still need to go through, if it's ultimately the dollars are appropriated, we'd have to go through another selection cycle for consultants, which would happen after next March, potentially. But I do think it shows an interest from the commission to look at these broader water quality issues from the shallow groundwater currently being used in Crook County and in and around Carlisle.
Any questions of Harry on what I think are two kind of related issues? That's tab J and tab P. No questions, okay. Harry, you can go on to the next project.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, if you go to tab L, this is the Lander transmission pipeline in Lance. I'd invite you to come up. We received, this is Lance Hopkin, Public Works Director for the City of Lander. We've received a request, proposed budget of $3,091,000 to construct a new water storage tank in Lander to replace 3 existing tanks which have roof issues. The application came in end of August. My sense to you is that it was not complete, and there were a number of issues there. But what Lander is seeking is to amend a 2016 appropriation, which involves some transmission line work in Lander, and add this $3 million to that project. So what I would suggest to you is that this application is not ready. That number one, the 2016 project has not started. I personally don't believe that trying to amend this large component onto a previous project is not appropriate. I think it should be a standalone application to you. And with regards to that, and we had some difficulty. We didn't get a resolution of support. Talked to Lance. Lance thought that it was sent end of August, early September. We actually got that resolution via email this week. There was not an application fee that was filed. Of course, they were viewing it as an amendment, not a new application. But the proposal that's been developed of a new tank, I think it's a worthwhile proposal, but I would like to see this project further developed because there's the inspection of these tanks shows that the problem is structural issues in the tank lids. These are concrete tanks. And there's some pictures we've provided. Actually, we've not provided those to you because this came into the city of Lander this week. Press these up for me, please. This is Lander's request that in terms of addressing a number of the concerns we have, but in this package, and this is what you'd said to us, Lance. Okay. Are some pictures of these tanks, and I would agree with the city of Lander that those lids need to be replaced, or they jeopardize the tank's future. But the community has enlisted a tank manufacturer, and they've looked at putting new lids on the tanks. There's a cost there. I think that's an alternative that ought to be explored further. The community has decided that it's in their best interest to pursue one new tank, 4 million gallons, to replace a 2 million gallon tank and 2 500,000 gallon tanks. And that's the nature of their request. But I think there needs to be additional life cycle analysis done. What if the tank cover replacement project, if you use aluminum domes, will be cheaper. There's also a question that we did a 2011 master plan for the community. It actually showed that the total storage needed in the community was 2.41 million gallons. This new 4 million gallon tank replacing 3 million gallons in storage and combining that with another 4 million gallon storage or 4 million gallon tank would give them a total of 8 million gallons of storage in the community. And I just think, I think definitely Lander needs to deal with this problem, but I don't believe that this application is ready for construction funding. So that's kind of my spiel. I've got a couple of other comments I'll make tomorrow, but Lance, I'd offer you the opportunity to address the commission, at least in terms of what's led you up to this project which was up until 6 months ago, I don't think identified as an issue in the community.
Correct. Chairman, Commissioners, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. So where we're currently at is that we were hoping we could coat these roofs or do something to extend their life once we started seeing issues. So we pursued what we thought, a company that could help us do something with these roofs. And unfortunately, we came back with 2 recommendations from engineers that we shouldn't even be on them. There shouldn't be weight on them, that any sort of additional dead load or snow load could make them fail. So we came to you with this proposal, and it was last minute. We were pushing to try to get the cost estimates for the new aluminum roofs or new concrete roofs, and then new tanks all together. And we received those on August 31st when your application's due September 1st. So we were trying to put everything together and get it in for this time period and try to get it in for this year's funding just because of the urgency of this project. And I agree, some of the things in the master plan say that we only need so much storage. Unfortunately, we've pushed the envelope on that storage multiple times. I've been in Lander 3 years and we haven't been able to make water at certain times of the year. We've had a community center fire that pushed that storage to almost nothing. And I know the master plan says we only need 3 million gallons of storage, but we've almost run out 3 times since I've been there. And we're surface water treatment with no backup supply is some of the issue. The reason for the new tank is because it's a cheaper option than the other tank options we looked at. The new roofs, yes, we can put them on. We don't know what the life of the tank will be at that point in time. There's concern with the quality and the structure of the walls. If the corrosion has gone as far as into those walls, and if we need to drill holes in them to figure out how much time we have left. So we're seeing as a cost benefit analysis that we could demo one of our tanks at one of our sites on property we own for $2.1 million. Or we could look at the option of trying to put new roofs on them, maybe get 10 to 20 years. We're not sure what we would get out of them, and we can't get a structural engineer to tell us what that life would be. So we think this is the best investment to get it done quickly. I know we haven't started on our phase 2 project yet, but there's reasons for that. We had some issues in a phase 1 project and had some design issues. So we're trying to make sure we don't have those issues moving forward. That funding will be spent. We just got the approval for the engineer application through the Water Development Office to move that project forward. So that's independent. It's still equally important, but we feel that these tanks need to be taken care of now. Be very, very embarrassing for us if we did have failure. I mean, we have hospitals, we have things like that need this water. And if we don't get it done now, then, I hope that we make it through another year if we have to go through next September and we can roll those dice. But I feel like we could put together a good project and get this done quickly.
Any questions of either Harry or Mr. Hopkins?
Lance.
Mr. Lancaster.
Thank you, Chairman. So the tanks were built in 77, it says on the second page. And so you got 40 years out of them about, and just now saw it, but that's because you came on the job. And
yeah, I started 2015 and Lander previously didn't have an engineer and a whole lot of plans before that. So we're trying to get better direction and look at things and steer the projects that need to be done a little better.
Other questions of either?
I had a question about the well houses. Was you going to tear one down or rebuild it or rehab it or what?
With the existing well house?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's the other part of the application. So in our phase 1 project, we had a pump house that was going to be removed. That was something when we came on in 2015, we put an end to because that's actually the redundant supply back to the hospital. It lets our tanks in the middle zones be able to be pumped back up to the upper zone. And that's the only way we can get water back to the hospital if something were to happen with our transmission line between the plant and the town. And if we also looked at putting tanks at a higher pressure to serve more customers in the future. And we don't think that that's a good idea because we're just separating so much supply from the rest of the town. If we were to have maintenance issues or problems, we've got to have something in 2 different spots. So that's why we're looking at rehabbing that pump station, is so that if something were to happen, that this would come on and provide that supply uninterrupted, and we could deal with those issues instead of building redundant transmission lines for 2.5 to 3 miles.
How long would it take if we funded you to get the aluminum roofs put in place?
Well, I would like to see us getting that done, the project done by started by October of next year during our off-peak season. So we make it through the irrigation season when we have our highest demands. And then when our demands drop off, see us taking that tank out of service and demoing it, and hopefully done by spring when we need our demands picked back up. So that would be the goal.
Other question is, how come you wasn't able to get a structural engineer to kind of give you is it too hard to find out the time limit for, or how long the tank's going to last?
I think it's really hard to get a structural engineer to guarantee anything. I think that they want to, be conservative in their estimates. They're telling us we can extend the life of those roofs, but they won't put a date on them. And the reason is just they can't see into those walls and how far the corrosion is. Our issue with the roofs right now is that corrosion has started. We are seeing strands break. They're actually blowing out concrete pieces on the ends of the tanks as they break, and it puts more load on the next piece and the next strand. And then as those are exposed, it's doing that in a chain reaction. If that's running down those strands and following that as far as corrosion into the walls because they're interconnected, then, once we get there, they would say, yeah, the rebar either is compromised or no, it looks fine. But it takes you getting into those walls and actually drilling holes in your tanks to figure that out.
Commissioner Bettis.
We had that happen in Cameron. And I believe that we actually had some slabs from the roof of that slab falling into the water. So I'm guessing they checked that while they checked the top too, huh?
Yeah, there's a lot of pictures of inside and outside inspection. We drained the tanks to look at these as we were trying to figure out what we could do. You can stand on the roof and you can see where the columns are in that. It sagged so much on all 3 of the tanks. Yeah, and there's some concern with having only the 2 tanks that are $500,000 each. They're a little small for fire flows. It's identified in our master plan. And also our rural water station is on one of those tanks, and it turns over quite frequently, while the other tank doesn't serve that many customers. We think we could improve water quality and also provide better fire flow supply if we were to combine this into one tank, as well as control our pressure zones a little better. We can move things around easier. So we think that's why the 4 million gallon tank is a better solution than trying to rehab or do 3 separate tanks. And I think that rural water station, it's something that's kind of missed in our master plan. We probably have over 4,000 customers who come in and pick up water from the city daily. And that's not a demand that's assumed in the 7,500 population that's in the master plan. So that's where a lot of our storage water goes. It's water sales, but it's a big part of our operations. It hasn't been metered or identified previously that we're trying to get a handle on.
Any other questions? I have a question. You've explained the timing and the emergency nature of your request, but how do you respond to the staff's concerns that application, emergency or no, it's kind of hard to go forward without adequate information?
Yes, Chairman, I would take full responsibility for that. I thought that certain paperwork made it down that did not. And so I do have a copy of the resolution and the check. We approved it at a council meeting, and we had a change in clerks, someone who used to deal with water development staff directly, and these things happen versus a new clerk and trying to figure out how our operations can change. But, I didn't follow through to make sure that piece made it down when it was requested from the office. So I would say I made a mistake.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to the next project then. No further questions. And I would like to welcome Senator Anselmi Dalton and Commissioner Bettis and Commissioner Glick. And glad you made it for the rest of the afternoon.
Safe and sound.
Safe and sound. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I turn to tab B as in Victor in your project notebooks. So
That's the big one.
per Wyoming statute 99-99-1001, this deals with our reservoir O&M accounts. And by statute, the commission is required to review basically the financial solvency of each of those accounts. And if you deem that there are funds in any of those accounts in excess of what is required to operate the reservoir asset for each of the accounts, then those dollars are to be transferred to Water Development Account 1. We did that a number of years ago. There was, I believe, a $7 million transfer from Buffalo Bill to Account 1. And the legislature, after reviewing that transfer, said that we want to have approval authority over those transfers. So they changed the statute. And now, if those dollars are to be transferred, then it requires full legislative approval. So last August, at your meeting, we presented to you our staff financial analysis of each of those accounts. We believe that in Buffalo Bill, there is an additional $5.5 million that can be transferred at this point in time. The commission actually took an action to recommend that. So this recommendation in front of you then would be to formalize this request and place that transfer in the construction bill. And in so doing, then seeking legislative approval to do so. So that's following through as statutes now require. I've got a number of projects that we'll talk about in account 2 that, as I mentioned earlier this afternoon, $9 million in account 2 and $23 million in project request. So I'm going to suggest to you that one of the things you might consider is a recommendation to the legislature to transfer those Buffalo Bill funds not to account 1, but to account 2. And that will allow us to fund a number of projects this year, as well as you see our recommendations on recommending a design only with construction in subsequent years. So it will help account 2 tremendously, and account 1 right now is in pretty good financial shape. So that's what this recommendation is all about. Number 1, we're obligated to transfer to account 1, but I'll suggest you might want to consider questions on that.
This
You prioritize the
your other one's on red, so you're good. Keep going.
Is it time for a break?
It's about money.
Prioritize these projects then.
Mr. Chairman, for account two, yes, we provided, so what was it, 2 years ago, Commission provided new priorities for types of projects. You'll see in this spreadsheet, which is in the beginning of the project notebook, there's a column of priorities. Those are your priorities, one being the highest. And so I have a number of recommendations for projects, either no funding, partial funding, or funding only if the transfer comes from account one to account two.
Commissioner Lancaster.
So Harry, if we're able to transfer that money, will that pick up all the projects that we got pending? Or will that just pick up a portion of them in that account too?
Mr. Chairman, it'll only pick up a portion of those projects. It's probably, we'll get into kind of how my recommendations were prioritized and how this 5.5 million might fit in.
I lost that original number, that's why I had to ask. But we need 29 to do the project, but we're only at about 15 or 16.
Mr. Chairman, you need about $14 million additional to fund all those requests. But I would say to you that not all of those requests are ready to move forward. So,
thank you.
Questions of Harry? Harry, do you have any other projects to discuss?
Mr. Chairman, I do.
Okay.
So
Let me announce, if people are going to go to the restroom, you go through that door. It's easier than going through that door and all the way around. So just, thank you, Commissioner Geis.
So, Mr. Chairman, if you go to the second J tab, J2. This is the Interstate Irrigation and Reservoir Irrigation District Rehabilitation 2019. This is an account 2 project. And their request is for a little over $6 million. And it involves a new diversion structure, as well as then piping approximately, I want to give you the distance, it's 11 miles of canal.
You could have gone through that door right there.
I like to make a scene.
Okay, so the first thing I would tell you
Tab
is,
J.
with an account with only $9 million of available funds, we can't afford a $6 million project request. So what I am recommending here is that we start with their higher priority, which is replace the diversion structure on Burnt Fork Creek. Okay, that's the $417,100 recommendation to you. I think it's feasible, and we can afford that in account 2. The one thing I want to point out to you, and if you go to behind that recommendation, you go to a couple of maps. So you see it would be the first map. You see the interstate canal that's shown there. Okay, that diversion structure, as well as most of the 11 miles of canal, are located in Utah. And they serve predominantly lands in Wyoming. So on that first map, if you can, about a third of the way down the page is kind of a heavy dash line. That is the Wyoming-Utah border. And you can see Interstate Canal is actually in Utah. At the end of that canal, kind of, I guess I'll say in the lower left quadrant where that heavy blue line ends, that's where the diversion structure is located. But above or into the Wyoming, you see those lands, the irrigated lands are all shown in green. Approximately 95% of those lands are in Wyoming. So the water is diverted in Utah under a Utah water right and conveyed to Wyoming predominantly. And so my recommendation to you is to go ahead and fund the diversion structure. But since this is a little bit of an oddity, I wanted to point that out to you.
Any questions for Harry on this matter?
I got a question. It says right here, the sponsor anticipates applying for Trout Unlimited funding for diversion structure. So if they, would it be kind of like a match or what is that?
Well, so what Trout Unlimited will do, and they've done this across the state, across multiple states, excuse me, is that so Trout Unlimited wants to remove barriers for migration of fish, and diversion structures typically represent a barrier. So when they get involved in a project, they're willing to put money into a structure if that is made, I guess I'll say, trout friendly, where you're allowing, whether it's a fish ladder or diversion structures or structures such that the fish can move through there and yet they can still accomplish their diversion. If you recall Ray Canal, where we have a fish ladder, similar feature. I don't know that Trout Unlimited was involved in that project, but so what the district has done is they're planning to replace this diversion structure. Trout Unlimited is willing to cost share to get the fish barrier portions removed as part of that structure. So on this structure, they are, as it's saying, sponsor anticipates applying for Trout Unlimited funding for the Burnt Fork diversion structure. Now, for the pipeline piece, the converting from a canal to pipeline, they are anticipating seeking Bureau of Reclamation funding under the Salinity Control Plan. So that's a separate block of funding. They've not yet applied for that, and of course, we can't afford the whole project as currently proposed. I would suggest to the district that they seek the Bureau funding for their canal project, see how they end up, and then we can consider the canal lining either in smaller pieces at some later date into the future. But the Burnt Fork structure is their number one priority, so I'm recommending funding of it going forward there.
Welcome to Senator Driscoll and Representative Eckler.
Harry, a few years ago, we were involved in a project, and I don't think it involved very much funding, but the dam was in Utah and the irrigation was in Wyoming. Is this the same one or is this a different one?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Eckler, this is the same project, and in fact, that same map that I was referencing to shows the Beaver Meadow Reservoir. That is part of their water supply system as well. And we did, actually, you can see in 2013, we funded a level 1, in essence, master plan for this district. And since that time, when the application came in, it was not a district. They have since formed this irrigation district, and they want to move forward with items identified in their master plan. So this is the first level 3 application from them.
Any other questions of Harry on this? All right, what's next?
Go back to tab XYZ, Middle Piney Reservoir. So this is a refresher for everybody. Middle Piney Reservoir is under construction. Last June, the commission and Select Water awarded a construction contract in the amount of $11,220,165 to NW Construction. And at the time, there was adequate funding budgeted to award that contract, and it left $123,000 and some change in that budget. That is not enough for contingencies on this project. It's about a 1.1% contingency. We talked about in June that we would come back for a supplemental appropriation for this project to increase the contingencies to 15%. And so this request, that's what $1,560,000 will do. It will provide adequate contingencies for this project as it goes forward. And then the other thing that was brought to my attention is that this construction project will go on for the next 2 to 3 years because they have this limited construction season at the site, high elevation site. So we currently have, and this was a condition of the construction funding, a special use permit with the Forest Service, which basically makes water development responsible for operation. Well, number one, we're responsible for the reconstruction, rehabilitation of this dam. And two, then we are responsible for operations for a 30-year period. That is the longest the special use permit can be issued for. So we have an operational responsibility for this facility. Now, we do plan to enter into an operations agreement with the district that's been formed. That is the Middle Piney Watershed Improvement District. And they have said that they can afford to make some payments to the state for the delivery of their water, and they would in turn operate the facility to accommodate their delivery schedule. When their users call for water, they'll open the gates. So we'll have that management agreement in place, but we don't have funding for repairs necessarily, for instrumentation. There may be a need to bring professional engineers to look at the performance of the new dam. You know, what's the seepage, is there settlement, all of those kinds of things. And so it is appropriate that we establish an O&M fund for Middle Piney Reservoir while we have this special use permit in place. And so recommendation here, and it's a separate recommendation, is for $500,000 to set up a reservoir O&M account. And I am recommending that we use Buffalo Bill O&M account dollars to set up that account. That was brought forward in August to you. We didn't have a lot of discussion on that particular topic, but we think that's an appropriate use of Buffalo Bill funding to set up this account. So the combined of those two, part of it coming from Water Development Account 3, which would be the $1,560,000, and then $500,000 for the O&M account out of Buffalo Bill. So a total budget increase of $2,060,000. So that's really kind of to refresh your memory of where we're at on the Middle Piney project, but we do need additional funds there.
Further questions of Harry?
So in the original bid, we didn't say anything about this O&M when they bid it.
Mr. Chairman, we did not discuss that during the award of contract. And it was not part of the bid or anything. The O&M accounts usually follow after the construction has been completed.
And so they didn't do anything with Wink?
Wink would not be involved in an O&M account, Mr. Chairman. Wink is the design engineer on the project.
Aren't they overseeing the construction team? No.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. They are. And their funding, or the funding for their anticipated services, is part of the current appropriation. But we do expect potential change orders on this project because we're opening up an earthen embankment that was built in the 1940s. Even though it's been drilled, we anticipate that there will be additional change orders, hence the need for a 15% contingency fund in the budget.
Any other questions of Harry? Do we have well, welcome to Senator Dockstader. And do we have an additional project to discuss?
Mr. Chairman, there are 5 projects that I'd just like to bring to your attention in account 2, and they're all related in that I consider them worthy projects, but I am recommending no funding at this time because of the funding shortfall in account 2. So I'd like to talk about each of those and just my thinking in terms of recommendations there.
I want to take a break at 3:15, but I'll let you be done by then.
Might be.
So we won't have to take a break. Go ahead.
Okay, so there are 3, this is account 2, 3 projects. The Dry Creek Irrigation Project.
How many times is
Hit me
that?
with that.
Go ahead.
Tape.
Requested funding, $1,628,000 from, and this is a district. If it scores out as a priority 3 because it's transmission piping, and that's out of our operating criteria. So as I was looking to take good projects and reduce the dollar impact to account 2, that obviously is less than account or a priority 1 or 2 project. And so for that reason, I'm recommending no funding unless the Buffalo Bill funds are moved from account 1 to account 2. The second project is the Eden Valley Irrigation District Improvements, $351,000. That would be tab I2 if you're trying to follow along. That particular project, I'm recommending no funding there simply because Eden Valley is also seeking a $710,000 amendment to their existing project. That we'll talk about that Friday, but project bids were opened. They have insufficient funding for that project. And so they are seeking an amendment, and rather than fund one district with 2 projects, I'm recommending that this project not be funded, again, unless the Buffalo Bill funds are moved into account 2. And then we have 3 studies, the Boulder Irrigation District Rehabilitation, that's a level 2 project. The La Perelle Irrigation District Rehabilitation, $290,000. In your priority schedule, they are priority number 7. So they were lower priority. So when I look at trying to cut projects to bring us into budget, then they fell out. And then the last project is level 1 study, Upper Bluff Irrigation District Master Plan. Level 1 studies are a priority 8. So those 5 projects, I am recommending no funding because we don't have available funds, and that would leave you with a balance in account 2 of about $284,000, which is lower than I would like to see it. But if the transfer from Buffalo Bill flows to account 2, $5.5 million, then my recommendation is those 5 projects be funded. But right now, we do not have the available funding. So Friday, when we talk about account 2, I can visit a little bit more about the priorities and some of the other projects that I am not recommending full funding for, but at least partial funding. So with that, Mr. Chairman, if there are other questions on at least those 5 projects.
Commissioner Bettis.
Your priority stuff. We've got some priority level 1 projects there, and those weather marks are 9s. Oh, that's 2. Oh.
So, Mr. Chairman, the recommendations for funding in account 2 are either all a priority 1 or a priority 2.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman? Thanks.
Senator.
Sorry, my tardiness. It was a busy morning out west covering the elections. So, Harry, what does this do if we move funding from Buffalo Bill? What, do we leave something unattended, not taken care of? What am I not understanding here?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Dockstader, is part of the statute titled 99-99-1003 that sets up all of the reservoir O&M accounts. There's a provision that says Water Development Commission should review those each year. Any funds deemed to be in excess of those funds required to operate the accounts or the O&M obligations, any funds deemed to be in excess are to be transferred to account 1, Water Development Account 1. And there was a legislative change made 2 years ago that said that transfer has to be approved by the legislature. And so as part of this funding plan, we are planning to bring an amendment in an item in the construction bill that will say transfer $5.5 million from the Buffalo Bill O&M account as deemed excess by the commission to Water Development Account 1. Because Water Development Account 1 has adequate funding this year, I am suggesting to the commission that we should recommend to the legislature to transfer the $5.5 million from Buffalo Bill to account 2. And in so doing, we relieve, I think, what I would call financial distress in account 2. And those 5 projects specifically could be funded at that point.
So, Mr. Chairman, follow up. So this would be this would be a legislative move come January, is what you're saying. And Mr. Chairman, so what would have to occur? I heard you say Friday in there, and I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything because my company has to broadcast 5 state championship football games in Laramie on Friday and Saturday. So I'm trying to decide, do we need to do anything today? What do we need to do here, Harry?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Dockstader, today is a work session. This is really to discuss projects that may not have a positive recommendation from myself or kind of difficult issues on any particular project. If they're recommended for funding, we're not talking about them necessarily today. The formal action by the commission tomorrow will be account 1 and account 3 projects, and Friday will be account 2 projects. So in that packaging, if the commission agrees with my recommendation to move the $5.5 million from Buffalo Bill to account 2, then that will be the basis of developing the omnibus water bill construction. It will then be presented to the commission on December 13th and select water on December 14th.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Harry, are there any other issues according to the agenda that would wrap up the workshop for today?
So, Mr. Chairman, those are the projects I wanted to talk to you about because they have either a no recommendation or some other particular issue. But if there are questions about any of the other projects, I'd be happy to address those now.
Are there any other questions? Keeping in mind, I want to pat myself on the back for a quick meeting, but are there any other questions of Harry on any of these projects or any issues? Hearing none, we'll adjourn this workshop until 8:30. At 8:30 tomorrow, we'll start the joint meeting agenda.
And you're on TV tomorrow.
What's that?
You're on TV
We're
tomorrow.
on TV tomorrow.
So you have to wear a tie.
I will.